What's going on, guys? Eli Infante here with a photo breakdown of this shot of Julie, where we're gonna go over todo el pedo, vato, meaning the very beginning. How did this shoot even come about? What was my thought process during this shot? And some tips and tricks in Lightroom and Photoshop to make your images the best. For this photo shoot with Julie, she actually reached out to me on Instagram wanting to shoot. I looked at her profile, saw that she had a great look, and decided to set up a free TFP shoot to see if she had potential for future photo shoots. Additionally, we set up the wardrobe, and I decided to go with Fireman's Park because Fireman's Park is small, has a great spots for golden hour, and I knew that it was going to be a good spot just for a test shoot. So I even invited my friend Francisco Hernandez to join in too. So for this photo, guys, in order to achieve this, I used the Explore 600 strobe, the Sony A7 III with the Sigma MC11, the Sigma 35mm for Canon, and my settings on the Explorer was full power. I was at 8,000 shutter speed. You can see here I was at aperture 2, the 35mm like I said, and the ISO 50 set. So this was the final shot here. I'm going to show you how I built that up in Lightroom in a moment, but first, what was my thought process in order to get this shot? Now my Lightroom is a little bit slow, my computer's a little bit slow here, but there we go. This is what it looks like with just natural light. If I hit the backslash key, this is what it looks like before. So the struggle when you shoot with natural light is you can't expose for your background and also expose for your subject. You have to choose between the two. And this is where high-speed sync, really the advantage comes into play over natural light. Not that one's better than the other, it's just in order to get the shot that I got here, I had to shoot high-speed sync. Here, what you'll see is I exposed for my background using natural light, and she's all underexposed. Of course, I can bring up the shadows like you see that I brought up here and the exposure, but it kind of gives me like a washed out, clouds in the background. Really not what I'm looking for. I was trying to achieve a dramatic look, and that is why I used the high-speed sync. Now with high-speed sync, this is the shot that you'll see that now I've turned on high-speed sync, and you'll see the difference. Let me see if I can hold control and select both of these, and if it'll actually work on my computer, and it'll cooperate with me. There we go. And so here you'll see to the left is the high-speed sync shot, and to the right is the natural light, trying to bring up the shadows. And so essentially what you're doing when you're shooting high-speed sync is you're shooting natural light. You're always getting your camera, metering for your background, the sky, getting the background the way you want it to look. And of course, when you do that, your person is gonna be, or your subject is gonna be underexposed like you see here on the shot that I have on the computer. And that's when you bring in your flash. In my case, I used the Explore 600. I was using the Westcott 48-inch softbox. And when you do that, now I can expose for both subjects, the background and now the person. And so now let's kind of go through my thought process. I was here, I had her against the rail, and I'm just kind of working the pose a little bit, shooting into the sun. There's gonna be one issue that you're gonna see that I didn't like, and it happens right about here. So let me zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. What I'm getting is a big overexposed sun. Whenever you're shooting into the sun's gonna be overexposed pretty much all the time. Even if I'm at shutter speed 8,000, this one I was at 6,400, the only possible way would be to bring down my my aperture, put it at like f11, 16, but I didn't want to do that in this case. I wanted to have a shallow depth of field. And so in order to get rid of this sun, right, I could also clone it in Photoshop, clone this over, but I didn't want to do that. So one little trick that I like to do when I'm shooting into the sun is have the model, or position the model I should say. I'm gonna get the camera and move my position so that her body is covering up the sun. So you're gonna see me do that here. I'm working the shot, still getting the poses down, right? And you can still see I still got that overexposed sun there. And I'm changing my position until here, where now I finally have that overexposed sun gone now. And so now it's just a matter of working the pose a little bit. So now she has her hand up, looking up, and I kind of like that, but there's something missing. I fixed the sun, the pose is looking good, and then she finally does this, where she closes her eyes. And I decide, okay, I love the eyes closed, that's really cool. I liked how she was looking up, there was something missing. So I decided to tell her, you know what? close your eyes, look up towards the light where I had my strobe light, and then bam, this is the shot that I ended up getting. And all of this was kind of built up once again. I showed you what the natural light looked like, and then I positioned myself so that the sun was blocked, had her close her eyes, and this was the shot that we got here. Now I'm gonna be showing you the settings that I used in Lightroom to get this shot to pop. All right guys, now we're into the fun stuff now. We're in Lightroom and we're gonna kind of break this down, the settings I used, and also I wanna go back to the settings I used for this particular shot in camera. So I'm at shutter speed 8000 here because I wanted to pull all the detail as possible from the sky, right? The higher the shutter speed, the more detail I'm gonna get in the background if I'm shooting straight into the sun. Aperture 2.0 so that I didn't want to blur out the background so much. I did want to pull a little bit of detail back into the clouds. Also, by stopping down a little bit, I was able to kind of tone down the sun ever so slightly. And then ISO 50 because I wanted to have the sensor less sensitive to the light, especially with me shooting into the sun. As far as the settings, let's look at the before and after so you guys can see exactly where I made my changes. If I click the cycle between before and afters, you'll see here that the image straight out of camera came out pretty good, but I shot in golden hour. I love shooting in golden hour, and if I'm shooting in golden hour, I want to bring out the yellows, I want to bring out the oranges to really emphasize the colors. When I posted this photo on Facebook, a lot of people thought I color gelled it, and I didn't do any of that. All I did was just bring up the yellows in Lightroom and in Photoshop to really enhance those colors. Now, if you ever find yourself stuck, not sure what to bring up in your colors, use something called the Adobe Color CC. This will show you the dominant colors that you have. All you gotta do is just import your image and it'll show you the main colors. And here, what was cool is that most of my colors all fell in this analogous color scheme, right? All these little color families. And this is all, once again, done through editing as well, but also in Lightroom. So let's go back into Lightroom. Let's look at the settings that I did. You'll see here that I brought my exposure up. I did contrast at -4. Highlights, I brought down just a little bit. Brought up that vibrance because obviously I want the colors to really shine on this image. The tone curve, I just did a slight S curve. I don't like to do a lot of tone curve in Lightroom. I feel like I have a lot more flexibility in Photoshop, so I usually don't do too much. And matter of fact, in Lightroom, I don't do a lot of editing, to be honest. I do more of my editing in Photoshop because I kind of use Lightroom as a base. Because of Lightroom's lack of layering system and layer masks, I find Lightroom to be a little bit limiting, so I save a lot of the stuff for Photoshop. If we go down, you'll see the saturation. I brought up the yellows to 20, so if I put it back at 0, you'll see that this is what it looked like before, kind of very washed out yellow. And by bringing it up, I'm emphasizing, once again, that those yellows. Brought up the oranges just a little bit. In the luminance, I brought down the yellows. So in luminance, it's the kind of tonal range of that color, the brights. And so by bringing it down to the left, it's gonna darken those yellows instead of it being so washed out, I guess you could say. And so I like toning this down so that I pull back in a little bit more color. And even though I made it darker, I did bring up a lot of the color. So even though it's getting dark, I'm giving it a little bit of vibrancy there through the saturation and luminance. And here you'll see more of my settings there. Split toning, once again, I do most of that in Photoshop, not in Lightroom. Every once in a while I will do it, but in this particular image I didn't. Sharpening, leave it at 40. Noise reduction, I put it at 28. What else do we got here? Vignetting, I don't like to get too crazy with the vignetting. I only did like -2 here. The grain, I kind of do 6 as a base, and then in Photoshop I might add more grain later on. And then lastly, the blue primaries, I usually bring up the saturation here to, depending on the photo, it varies. This one I did 18. If you bring it up more, it's gonna really bring out the colors too much sometimes. And so it's really a personal preference. as I mentioned, I typically like to do minimal editing in Lightroom, not getting too crazy, and leave most of the stuff in Photoshop because I have more flexibility with layers and layer masks. I also did use the adjustment brush. So if you click your adjustment brush, what I did was I added 3 different little sections here, pins. This first pin, I used the exposure, I brought it down, and the highlights just to bring in a little bit more detail back into this sky. I did also add a pin here where I brushed in a little bit of exposure on her and also for the shadows there. And the last pin, which is this one, let me click and hover over it. You can see that I brushed over the left and the right side of the gate there. Some of the light spill had appeared there, and I kind of also wanted to, by darkening the left and the right, now it kind of brings the light right to the middle where she's at, and it puts our attention right there. So I decided to darken up those 2 areas with the exposure down at -72 and highlights at -12. So before we move on to Photoshop, I'm going to give you a couple of tips in Photoshop. I just want to leave you one more time with the before and after here of the image that I got. All right, guys, so now we're in Photoshop, and I'm going to just give you some tips in Photoshop on how I color grade and also how I use layer masks. Now, I didn't want to make a full-length tutorial on everything I do in Photoshop because it was going to take forever, and I'm not even sure if you guys are interested in that. And if you are, leave a comment, let me know, and maybe I'll decide to do a full-on edit in Photoshop and show you my whole process. So for my process, what I usually start off with is a blemish and retouch layer where I remove all the blemishes, any kind of distractions in the image. Then I'll do my frequency separation and dodge and burn. Now those can change. Sometimes I'll do dodge and burn first and then I'll do frequency separation. But most of the time I'll do frequency separation and then dodge and burn, but sometimes it changes once again. So what I'm going to show you right now is color balance and also some layer mask stuff. So one of the flexibility that I do like about Photoshop is that I can add adjustment layers here. And if I go to color balance, I can now adjust my midtones, shadows, and highlights. So in this particular image, I want the image to be a little bit more warmer. So I'm actually going to bring up the reds to about +3, I should say, or let's do +4. So I'm going to type in 4. And then I also want some yellows to come back because now her skin's getting a little bit too red. So I'm going to put it like at -2, right about there. The shadows, I typically like to add some blue tones to the shadows, so I'll bring in my shadows up, and it's really up to personal preference on what you want to use, okay? So for me, I'll probably put this at maybe let's do +4 on this one, okay? And then we'll go into the highlights. Highlights are gonna be the bright areas of the image, and we know the bright area is going to be the sun, so it would make sense for us to increase the yellows to really make that stand out. So if I put it at -6, that looks pretty good. I can always, because of the layering system in Photoshop, just click the before and after to see with the eyeball here to see if it looks better. I like this. This is personal preference. It's up to you. But one suggestion would be to experiment with the color balance and then just click the eyeball to see if you like what you've added or didn't like, right? The next thing that I wasn't satisfied with this image was the clouds. The clouds weren't as dramatic as I wanted them to be. And so one of the ways I can do that was with the brightness and contrast, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an adjustment layer. Where is it? Brightness and contrast right there. There we go. And when I increase the contrast, I'm going to drag it to the right. You're going to see how more this little background kind of glows and the colors really stand out now. If I click this little eyeball, you'll see that the colors really change a lot and it's really cool. The only issue is that it's applying it to the entire image. If you know how layer mask works, white square here means that it's showing up everywhere and throughout the entire image. White means it's revealing. I'm going to press Control-I to invert that, so it's going to turn it black, meaning that this adjustment that I just made isn't showing up everywhere. I'm going to get the brush set to white, opacity at 100, maybe the flow, let's bring it down just a little bit so I can slowly, gradually build it up at 76, soft brush at normal, and I'm going to go ahead and brush in that contrast only onto the sky, all right? And so now that setting that I just created through contrast, and sorry, my laptop's kind of slowing down for some reason, but basically now I'm just brushing in a setting where I want, opposed to it being brushed in everywhere throughout the entire image, right? So I'm gonna let my computer kind of catch up. I don't know why it's acting slow. Poor little computer. There we go. So it caught up. If I hit the backslash, this is a little tip here. If I hit the backslash key, it'll show me where I've brushed. So you'll see that I've missed some areas over here. So I'm gonna brush in white, right? There we go. I can brush here, there. Making my brush smaller with the left bracket on the key. Also, I love using the stylus. One of the reasons why I love this laptop is that it has a built-in stylus touchscreen, so I don't have to have an extra Wacom tablet, so I save some money by doing this, and I absolutely love it. And so now I'm just gonna kind of refine this little area where it's being brushed, because I don't want this contrast to show up over her face. Now, of course, I would spend a little bit more time doing this. Right now I'm gonna do this fast because my computer is being shy right now because it's on YouTube and it's slowing down. So it's okay, little computer, we're almost done here. So we're gonna end it there, okay? Of course, once again, I would probably zoom in and take my time. I'm gonna push the backslash key to get that off. And now you'll see down here where it's white, only that contrast is being adjusted. So if I click the eyeball, this was the before and then this was the after. And that's what really helped my background and my image pop. You can always, if you feel like it's too much, you can always bring down the opacity if you need to and kind of adjust it to taste. Or you can also double click and then bring down the contrast here. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where I felt like Lightroom, you have disadvantages over Photoshop. And this is one of the reasons why I do a lot of my toning in Photoshop, because of the layer masks and the flexibility of layers, and Lightroom doesn't have any of that. So with that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I have a lot more videos coming out. I've just been busy with client work lately, but be on the lookout for more videos. And if you want to see a full-on video edit, let me know in the comments and I'll get one out soon. Thank you.